Imagine walking into a casino with a credit card that has no limit. You can't lose your house, you can't go to jail, and the casino never ever kicks you out. In fact, the more you borrow, the more powerful you become. Sounds completely insane, right? Well, that's basically how modern governments operate. And here's the kicker. It wasn't always this way. There was a specific moment in history, a single decision made in a hotel room in New Hampshire that changed everything. This decision gave governments around the world a superpower they'd never had before. And like all superpowers, it came with a terrible temptation. Today, global government debt stands at over $100 trillion. That's trillion with a T. To put that into perspective. If you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you almost 300,000 years to spend that much money. But here's what nobody tells you. Governments aren't just comfortable with this debt. They're addicted to it. They need it. And the system we live in today simply can't function without it. So what happened? How did we get here? And why can't we go back? Stick around, because what you're about to learn will completely change how you see money, power, and the world economy. The year is 1944. World War II is raging, but the Allied powers are already planning for the peace. Representatives from 44 nations gather at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal is to create a new global economic system, one that would prevent the kind of economic chaos that led to the war in the first place. What they created was the Bretton Woods system. The deal was simple. Every major currency in the world would be pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar, in turn, would be pegged to gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. This meant any country holding US dollars could, in theory, walk up to the US Treasury and exchange their dollars for a real, physical stack of gold. This gold standard acted as a fiscal straitjacket for governments. It put a hard limit on how much money they could print. You can't just print more gold, after all. This created a period of incredible stability and growth known as the post-war economic boom. For about 25 years, the system worked beautifully. But then, the temptation began to set in. The United States started spending. A lot. The Vietnam War was incredibly expensive, and so were President Johnson's Great Society social programs. The US was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them up. Other countries, especially France, started getting nervous. They began to suspect the US was writing checks it couldn't cash. So they started calling America's bluff, demanding gold for their dollars. The US gold reserves started plummeting. President Richard Nixon faced a choice. Either enact painful budget cuts and risk a massive recession, or break the promise. On August 15, 1971, in what became known as the Nixon shock, he went on television and announced the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. The golden straitjacket was off. The casino credit card was activated, and the world was never the same again. Instantly, all the world's currencies became fiat currencies, meaning their value was based on nothing but faith in the government that issued them. Governments were now free to print as much money as they wanted whenever they wanted. And boy, did they want to. This is the moment the global debt spiral truly began. So why is this debt a problem? Because it fundamentally changes the nature of money. When you can print money endlessly, it loses its value through inflation. Your savings are worth less every year. It's a hidden tax that nobody votes for. It also encourages reckless spending and creates massive economic bubbles. And when those bubbles pop, as they always do, it's ordinary people who pay the price. We're now living in the endgame of this 50-year experiment. Central banks have to keep printing money just to keep the system from collapsing under the weight of all that debt. Let's rewind the clock. Way back, before World War II, governments played by a very different set of financial rules. It was called the gold standard, and it was brutally honest. Think of it this way. Every single dollar, pound, or franc was directly backed by real, physical gold sitting in a vault. If a country wanted to print more money, it needed more gold. It was like a video game with no cheat codes. You had to earn every coin. This meant governments couldn't just rack up endless debt. If a country borrowed too much, other nations would come knocking, demanding their payment in gold. And if you ran out of gold, game over. Your currency would collapse, leading to economic disaster. Britain learned this the hard way in 1931. Crushed by war debt, they were forced to abandon the gold standard. The British pound, once the world's most trusted currency, plummeted by 30% almost overnight. It was a global financial humiliation. For centuries, debt was scary. It was a real and present danger. Governments borrowed only when absolutely necessary, usually for wars, and then spent decades painstakingly paying it back. But then, in the summer of 1944, everything changed. Picture this: the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. 700 delegates from 44 countries are packed into a remote resort. World War II is still raging in the Pacific and European cities lie in ruins. Their mission? To design a new global economy from the ashes. The British, led by the brilliant economist John Maynard Keynes, had one plan. The Americans, led by Harry Dexter White, had another. After 3 intense weeks, the Americans got their way. They created the Bretton Woods system. And here's where things get really interesting. Under this new system, the US dollar became the world's reserve currency. All other currencies would be pegged to the dollar, and the dollar itself would be backed by gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Why did this work? Because America emerged from the war holding 2/3 of the world's gold. They were the only major economy left standing, with all the factories, resources, and military power. Essentially, America wrote the new rules of global finance, and everyone else had to play along. For about 25 years, this system held up more or less. Countries could borrow, but there were still limits because everything ultimately traced back to that gold in Fort Knox. The safety valve was still attached. But then the 1960s arrived, and the cracks began to appear. By the end of the decade, America had a big problem. It was funding an incredibly expensive war in Vietnam while also launching massive social programs at home. The government was spending money like it was going out of style, and other countries were taking notice. France, led by President Charles de Gaulle, was the first to call America's bluff. Starting in 1965, de Gaulle began aggressively exchanging his country's dollars for gold. He wasn't subtle about it either. He literally sent the French Navy to New York Harbor to pick up the gold and sail it back to France. Soon, other countries followed suit and America's gold reserves started to shrink fast. By 1971, President Richard Nixon was facing a full-blown crisis. At the rate gold was flying out of the country, the entire Bretton Woods system was on the verge of collapse. So, on August 15, 1971, Nixon made an announcement that would permanently alter the course of modern history. He unilaterally closed the gold window. No more exchanging dollars for gold. The link was severed, just like that. Nixon claimed it was a temporary measure to stabilize the system. But here's the kicker. It was never temporary. It became permanent. In that moment, the safety valve that had constrained government spending for centuries was gone. Welcome to the age of fiat currency money that has value simply because the government says it does. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so what? Money is money, right? Wrong. Everything changed after 1971, and the data tells a wild story. Before 1971, the US government debt grew slowly and steadily. There were spikes during wars, followed by years of paying it down. The pattern was predictable. After 1971, the curve goes almost vertical. From 1971 onwards, debt has exploded in nearly every developed country on Earth. It's not just America. It's Japan, it's Europe, it's everywhere. Why? Because governments discovered something intoxicating. They could solve any problem by borrowing. Economic recession? Borrow and spend? Banking crisis? Borrow and bail them out. Want to win an election? Borrow and fund popular programs. And the best part? There was no immediate consequence. No angry French president showing up to take your gold. Just more debt. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a politician. You have 2 choices. Option A. Raise taxes or cut spending. Make everyone mad and probably lose the next election. Option B. Borrow money. Fund everything. Make everyone happy. Win re-election. And let some future politician deal with the debt. What would you choose? Be honest. This is what economists call the timing consistency problem. The costs of borrowing show up decades later, long after you've left office. But the benefits? They show up immediately, right before the next election. It's the perfect political drug. Let's talk numbers for a second because they're absolutely mind-blowing. In 1971, the US federal debt was about $400 billion. Today, it's over $36 trillion. That's not a typo. The debt has increased by 90 times in just over 50 years. Japan's government debt is now over 260% of its entire economy. That means if Japan took every single yen earned in the country for more than 2.5 years, it still couldn't pay off its debt. The European Union? Collectively drowning in debt. Even before the pandemic, many European countries were borrowing just to pay the interest on their existing debt. It's like using one credit card to pay off another. And here's what keeps central bankers up at night. Nobody knows what happens when you push this to its limit. We're in uncharted territory. This experiment has never been tried before in human history, not at this scale. Some economists say it's fine, we can keep borrowing forever. Others say we're heading toward a catastrophe that'll make 2008 look like a minor hiccup, so why can't we just stop? Here's where it gets really dark. Because the honest answer is we can't stop, not anymore. Modern economies are built on the assumption of constant growth. More jobs, more spending, more consumption every single year, and when growth slows down, governments borrow to artificially create it. The COVID-19 pandemic showed this perfectly. When the economy shut down, governments around the world spent over $17 trillion they didn't have. They just created it. And they had no choice because the alternative was economic collapse. But it's not just emergencies, it's everything now. Social security programs, healthcare systems, and infrastructure projects are all built on borrowed money and promises of future growth. We've created a system that's like riding a bicycle. As long as you keep moving forward, you're fine. But the moment you try to stop, you fall over. And there's another layer to this. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank, keep interest rates artificially low. Why? Because if interest rates went back to historical levels, governments couldn't afford to service their debt. The interest payments alone would consume their entire budget. So we're trapped in this strange loop. Governments need low rates to afford their debt. But low rates encourage more borrowing. But wait, there's one more piece to this puzzle. And it's probably affecting your wallet right now. When governments can't raise taxes and can't cut spending, there's a third option. It's subtle, it's sneaky, and most people never even realize it's happening. It's called inflation. Think about it. If the government owes $10 trillion today and they print a bunch of new money, the debt doesn't grow. But the value of each dollar shrinks. So effectively, the debt becomes smaller in real terms. It's like if you owed someone $1,000, but you could snap your fingers and make every dollar worth only 90 cents. You still owe $1,000, but you're actually paying back less real value. This is why your groceries cost more. Why is housing more expensive? Why does it feel like your paycheck doesn't go as far as it used to? You're not imagining it. It's the hidden cost of endless government borrowing. Inflation is a tax that doesn't require a vote in Congress. It just quietly transfers wealth from savers and workers to borrowers and governments. So here we are, living in a world where governments are addicted to debt, trapped in a system they can't escape, and using inflation as a pressure valve to keep the whole thing from exploding. The dark secret isn't just that governments got hooked on debt, it's that they had to. The system we built after 1971 requires constant borrowing to function. Without it, everything stops. Pensions fail, social programs collapse, economies crater. We traded the harsh discipline of the gold standard for the flexibility of fiat currency. And that flexibility gave governments the ability to smooth over recessions, fund wars, build infrastructure, and create social safety nets that have lifted billions out of poverty. But it also gave them the ability to kick the can down the road forever, to make promises today and send the bill to tomorrow. To borrow from the future to pay for the present. The question isn't whether this system is good or bad. Both are probably true. The real question is, how long can it last? Some economists believe we can maintain this forever, as long as the economy keeps growing and inflation stays manageable. Others think we're building toward a reckoning that will redefine how money works. And honestly, nobody knows for sure. Because we've never been here before. What we do know is this: that decision made in 1971, to close the gold window and sever the link between money and gold, created the world we live in today. A world where money is just trust, where debt is just numbers on a screen, and where governments are caught in a cycle they can't break. So the next time you hear about government debt hitting a new record, remember it's not a bug in the system. It's a feature. It's how the system works now. And we're all part of this grand experiment, whether we like it or not. The real question is, what happens when the experiment ends? If this blew your mind, hit that subscribe button, because we're diving into more financial mysteries that affect your life every single day. And drop a comment below. Do you think governments can keep borrowing forever, or are we heading toward a crisis? I'm genuinely curious what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.